Tales of Estolia. Volume 1. The Promise of Zacharias. Part 5. According to Prophecy. Chapter 10. The Package. After I became king, I began researching the courtships of all our former kings. It was far more fascinating than I expected. And it was also extensive. My female ancestors were an extraordinary collection of individuals from so many walks of life, that I couldn't begin to summarize what made any single woman right for the position of queen. I delved into the project with great energy, finding an affinity with the past that was unexpected and fulfilling. I learned that even the simplest seeming courtship ended up being fraught with nuances. Courtship of Kings, Tiernan and Zacharian, Intro to Volume 1. Leon held Callista as she cried. After a time, she fell asleep. It was peculiar to have her in his arms, as if his soul was already securely within her keeping. He could imagine the happiness that contact alone would bring them throughout their lives together. He was no longer sure whether his plans were right for her. He intended to possess this woman, make her his, bring her home to Estolia, and keep her. Being Queen of Estolia was a difficult role to take on. If he used her distress to fulfill his own needs, would that not make him just as bad as her professor? He shifted uncomfortably as considered the ramifications. He didn't reach any helpful conclusion, but he did see her aura. He had to believe that deity wouldn't give him that sign if his presence in her life would harm her. He resolved to proceed, having faith that any and all obstacles that they might meet would be smoothed over or eliminated by deity. While she slept, he made detailed plans. The jet was fueled and waiting for his arrival at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. His brother was forwarding to him the information he had on Callista, so he could understand her situation more fully. If he was cautious, careful, and did everything he could to make choices that were not only right for him, but also right for her, then everything would work out. His plans for her, ultimately, were in her best interests, but it was vital that the actions he took from this point forward were always right for the two of them. He would employ a specialty firm to investigate the disagreeable professor. If he made a habit of propositioning his students, they would obtain proof and see that he lost his job as a result. Leon felt a thrill of satisfaction at the thought of stopping the professor from preying on young women. The bruises on young Callista's arms infuriated him. He had to stifle the desire to have the professor maimed so he would never force another unwilling young woman into his bed. He read the information that his brother sent about the woman asleep in his arms. Callista's brother, Orion, having learned about Estolia from Nico, suggested that she would feel more comfortable in Estolia than the United States. He described her as shy, sweet, self-effacing, not well suited emotionally or psychologically to the culture and norms of her country. When Nico met her, he agreed, and planned to introduce her to Leon as he neared his 30th birthday. Just over a year ago, she was involved in a dreadful accident with her family. Orion's last action had been to protect Callista. Their parents, too, fell victim to the out-of-control car that careened into the crowd of concertgoers. Callista's ankle was crushed but she was otherwise uninjured. The doctors had to operate on her ankle 3 times. The 3rd time, they fused the bones of her ankle. She had months of physical therapy before the limitations became obvious. Her ankle would always be weak, limiting her choices for employment as a student. Nico's report indicated that she was incredibly intelligent, doing very well in all academic disciplines. She did not yet have a specific subject she was studying, having enjoyed every class she took. She was 20. The only thing missing in the report was whether or not Leon would see her aura. The final lines of the report said, "Will Callista Tear be the one woman, above all other women, to capture Leon's heart, ensnare his body, and keep his soul safe? Will he see the visible manifestation of her soul, her aura?" A loud buzzing sound at the end of the hallway was followed immediately by the cessation of the humming sound of the dryer. She began to stir in his arms. Callista was confused for a moment. The warm arms holding her were comforting. Then she remembered. She cried all over the handsome stranger, and then fell asleep in his arms. She pulled away from him, her eyes meeting his. "Please forgive me for my emotional outburst. I didn't mean to take so much of your time." "There is nothing to forgive. I can only hope I have done you a service in being available for you." The release of emotions helped, but didn't solve her problem. She stood up and walked over to the table strewn with financial documents. She looked again at her bank statement. By the end of the week, she would be overdrawn. The loss of her scholarship would only exacerbate her situation. The mismanagement of money following the death of her family was her biggest problem. He followed her over to the table and stood next to her, looking at the paper in her hand. He could see how dear her financial situation was. "Do you have any family to turn to help you out?" "No. My family died in an accident a year ago. I'm alone in the world. I'm hopeless at coping with this." She indicated the pile of documents. "I don't have the slightest idea what I'm supposed to do." She felt more comfortable with Leon Zakarian than anyone else she'd ever known outside of her family. Even though she had only just met him. "In my country, your family would have arranged an advantageous marriage with the family of the man fortunate enough to be acceptable. Even in this modern era?" "Especially," he asserted. "I am obligated to marry. In fact, the letter mistakenly sent to your mailbox is a command that I return to my country and, if unmarried still, I am to marry whomever my father has decreed." A smile tugged at the corners of his full lips. "Perhaps you would do me the honor of marrying me?" The meaning of his words ricocheted around in her mind. After a time, she looked away, confused, unsure how to respond to him. "We would both benefit. You have a financial crisis that requires a solution, and I quite like the idea of choosing my own mate rather than having one thrust upon me." The image of this man intimately entwined with her on a bed flashed into her mind. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, uncomfortably aware that her face was covered in mottled red. She should decline his proposal, but the echo of his voice and compelling accent reverberated through her mind. As the silence stretched, she eventually blurted out, "You don't even know me." She could hear the hesitation in her voice. She wanted to say yes to him, allow him to take over her concerns and problems, and rely on him to keep her safe. He took the bank statement from her and set it on the table before gently taking her hand and leading her back into her living room. Guiding her to sit on the sofa, he reached for the ring box. His eyes met hers. "Nevertheless, I meant my proposal. Will you do me the honor of marrying me?" She was mesmerized by his eyes, by the intent within them. She was only barely aware of nodding her head, agreeing to marry him. She felt the cold of metal and looked down at a beautiful ring on her finger, and what he asked began to sink in.